If world politics was a movie, Russian President Vladimir Putin has been considered the villain for a while, and for good reason. But his time of wrongdoing just might be over. In a shocking twist, the Chinese government now appears to be joining forces with Ukraine against Russia, and that could lead to unexpected shifts in diplomacy. What are the potential ripple effects of this decision? Let's find out. To fully understand what's going on in Ukraine, we need to roll back the years a bit, all the way back to when it all began in 2014. It was the year Russia decided to snatch up Crimea, sparking tensions that only got worse. But it wasn't until 2022 that things really went into overdrive when Russia launched a full-on attack on Ukraine. This is when everything really went haywire, with thousands of lives lost and millions of people displaced as the war continued. Despite the global outcry and sanctions to punish Russia, Moscow's military campaign has kept churning along, putting Ukraine's sovereignty in serious jeopardy. Big players in the global scene, such as NATO, couldn't just stand by and watch this unfold. NATO, which is essentially a group of countries that have agreed to support each other in times of trouble, wasn't shy about jumping in to support Ukraine. Right off the bat, NATO members, with the US at the forefront, started sending all sorts of military aid to Ukraine, everything from weapons and ammunition to cutting-edge tech like air defense systems. And it wasn't just about sending equipment either. NATO also stepped up with training programs to help Ukrainian soldiers better handle their new arsenal, making them much more formidable on the battlefield. And that's not all. NATO's been working on the diplomatic side too, pushing for peace talks and stressing Ukraine's right to its territory. But of course, that's been a lot harder. Russia hasn't been exactly eager to sit down and negotiate, and getting the Kremlin to agree to anything substantial has been like pulling teeth. So despite all the help from NATO, it's not been easy. With the constant pressure to end the war, NATO's efforts to mediate peace talks have run into a brick wall because Russia doesn't seem interested in stopping. Russia's been playing the game, acting like they're open to discussions while continuing their military actions. Meanwhile, NATO has been trying to keep the pressure on, pushing for ceasefires, talking up Ukraine's sovereignty, and trying to rally support for a peaceful resolution. And to make sure Russia is aware that any further aggression in Eastern Europe won't go unchecked, NATO has strengthened its military presence in the region. Think more troops, more air patrols, and more defenses. They're showing Russia that crossing certain lines will have consequences, even if direct involvement in the war is something they're actively trying to avoid. But it's not just NATO making moves. Other global powers are getting involved as well. The US has been the brain behind Ukraine's military and financial support, sending loads of military aid to help Ukraine fight back against Russian advances. And at the same time, the US has hit Russia with some seriously tough sanctions, trying to squeeze Moscow's economy and make Putin rethink his next actions. And the European Union is involved too, backing Ukraine with sanctions, financial support, and even providing shelter for Ukrainian refugees who fled the violence. It's a massive, coordinated effort with countries working together to support Ukraine and squeeze Russia from all angles. And then there's Turkey, where the situation is a mixed bag. On one hand, they've sent military aid to Ukraine to help defend against Russian attacks. On the other hand, they've kept diplomatic ties with Russia, especially when it comes to energy and trade. Turkey's walk down the middle here shows how complicated these international relationships can be. They want to support Ukraine, but also have a lot to gain from keeping a good relationship with Russia, especially in terms of energy deals. But despite the support for Ukraine and the pressure being put on Russia, there's a clear global push for peace. Leaders from the UK and France have made it pretty clear they're frustrated with Putin's refusal to engage in meaningful peace talks. They've even hinted at forming a multinational peacekeeping force if Russia continues to stop efforts to end the war. Meanwhile, the US has put forward the idea of a temporary 30-day ceasefire, hoping that a short break in the fighting could lead to something more lasting. But as expected, Putin isn't budging. He's been pretty vocal about his resistance to any talks that might lead to a peaceful resolution, keeping the situation tense and leaving many wondering if there's ever going to be a real end in view. On the diplomatic front, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been pushing hard for the West to step up the pressure on Putin. He's been vocal in believing that if Moscow faced the right kind of economic and diplomatic pinch, a peace deal could be on the table within weeks. It's a bold claim, but Zelensky's been relentless in trying to convince Western powers to take a harder stance, hoping it might force Putin into serious negotiations. And on the other side of the Atlantic, even US President Donald Trump has been offering his services to broker peace. Now, while Trump's willingness to step in might seem like a potential game changer, European leaders are far from convinced. They're skeptical to say the least, accusing Putin of using diplomatic talks to buy time while continuing his military campaign. Essentially, they believe he's playing a waiting game, hoping that the longer the war continues, the more leverage he'll have. Now, here's where things get interesting, though. Enter China. While the whole world seems to be taking sides, China has managed to remain neutral, adopting a stance that's neither fully for Russia nor for Ukraine. Officially, China claims to be the neutral party in this whole mess, and it consistently calls for peaceful negotiations and dialogue, repeating phrases like, "We respect the sovereignty of all nations," "Dialogue and diplomacy are the only solutions," and "We don't take sides." Now, this sounds like the diplomatic equivalent of being Switzerland, neutral and non-committal. On the surface, it seems like China's just pushing for peace without picking a side. But, as always, there's more to the story. Behind this neutral stance, China has been much more in agreement with Russia than you might realize. While not offering direct military support, China has stepped in economically, buying Russian oil and gas to help boost the Russian economy amid Western sanctions. After the West sanctioned Russia heavily, China became an essential aid to Moscow's economy. It's buying energy supplies from Russia, giving Moscow a cushion to absorb the financial blow. It's clear that Beijing has been willing to provide economic support, helping Russia stay afloat even as the sanctions continue. Plus, China hasn't come out and condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What's more, they're also not exactly offering any help to Ukraine. Instead, China seems to be playing a game of diplomacy, keeping its distance from directly supporting or criticizing Russia. When it talks about the situation, China avoids using words like war or invasion, making sure not to take a side too firmly. And in forums like the United Nations, China has echoed some of Russia's talking points, such as blaming NATO for escalating the conflict. They're definitely providing some diplomatic cover, giving Russia a bit of a shield when it faces global criticism. But here's where things take a turn. Despite all this aid, China has refused to give military aid. While they've helped Russia out economically and diplomatically, they've stayed well clear of sending weapons, troops, or any other direct military assistance. This leads to an interesting question. Is China a fake ally? Well, some analysts seem to think so. While China's economic support is undeniable, they've been careful not to get too involved in the military side of things. They've avoided any actions that could draw Western sanctions their way, staying on the fence while maintaining a relationship with Russia that benefits their own interests. In short, China's approach is about playing it safe, making sure they're not too closely tied to any one side, all while keeping their options open for whatever the future holds. So, is China a fake ally? Well, it's not so much that they're pretending, but more that they're only involved to the extent that it serves their strategic goals. So let's take a look at the dynamics of this relationship between Russia and China. At first, it might seem like they're two peas in a pod, but take a closer look and the cracks start to show. Russia is growing more and more dependent on China, especially with the ongoing sanctions and global isolation. Moscow needs Beijing for economic support, particularly in energy markets, and China has been more than happy to step in and fill that gap. However, it's not all glitz and rainbows for Russia. China has made it crystal clear that in this partnership, it's the one calling the shots. And so as Russia becomes more dependent on China, Beijing has the upper hand, and that's something Moscow is starting to feel. But the real kicker here is the long-term goals of both countries. Russia's agenda is pretty simple. It thrives on instability and doesn't mind stirring the pot in regions like Ukraine. For Russia, a little chaos can be a good thing if it helps further its own interests. But China, well, China's playing a very different game. Beijing values stability, economic stability, political stability, and global stability. For China to keep growing its huge economy, it needs calm, predictable environments where trade can flourish. And this difference in goals could eventually cause some serious tension between the two, as China's need for stability doesn't exactly jive with Russia's more disruptive strategy. So, what does this all mean for the future of the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Well, while the war is far from over, China's role, though officially neutral, could play an essential role in how the conflict unfolds. If China increases pressure on Russia or pushes for a peaceful resolution, we might see a significant shift in global dynamics. As for Putin, his ability to leverage diplomatic ties, especially with China, could be severely weakened, which could eventually pave the way for a breakthrough in the peace talks. That's all for this video on China joining Ukraine to defeat Russia, but it's definitely not the end of this political squabble. What do you think about these recent events, and how would you like to see it all unfold? Let us know in the comments section, and enjoy our other videos.